Imagine a city surrounded on all sides, its people outnumbered and exhausted, facing an enemy force so massive that defeat seems inevitable. Now picture this, in the heart of the Arabian desert. A small community stands on the brink of annihilation, with every hope fading and every escape route blocked. How did they survive? What secret weapon turned the tide when all seemed lost? The story of the Battle of the Trench isn't just a tale of swords and strategies, a saga of betrayal, desperation, and a twist that no one saw coming. For nearly a month, Medina was under siege, its defenders pushed to the edge by hunger, fear, and the constant threat of attack. But as the enemy closed in, something extraordinary happened, something that would change the course of history forever. Was it a stroke of genius, a miracle, or sheer determination that saved the city? Today, we're diving deep into the untold secrets, the hidden alliances, and the shocking moments that defined one of the most dramatic showdowns in early Islamic history. Stay with us, because what happened next would leave even the most seasoned warriors stunned. The world would never be the same again. The seeds of this crisis were sown long before the enemy armies ever appeared on the horizon. It all began when the Banu Nadir, a powerful Jewish tribe, were expelled from Medina after a series of betrayals. Forced into exile, they settled in Kabar, but their thirst for revenge only grew stronger. Instead of accepting their fate, the Banu Nadir's leaders began plotting a comeback that would shake the foundations of the city they once called home. They traveled from tribe to tribe, whispering promises of power and vengeance, stirring up old grudges and forging new alliances. Their first stop was Mecca, where they convinced the Qurayza, the Prophet's fiercest rivals, that now was the perfect time to strike. But they didn't stop there. The Banu Nadir's envoys moved on to the Ghatafan, a formidable Bedouin tribe, and offered them a share of Khabar's rich harvest in exchange for their support. One by one, the tribes of Arabia were drawn into the conspiracy, each bringing their own warriors, weapons, and ambitions to the table. Soon, a coalition unlike anything Arabia had ever seen was taking shape. 10,000 strong, this alliance of Quraysh, Ghatafan, Banu Sulaim, and others was determined to wipe Medina off the map. The city's defenders, by comparison, were a tiny fraction of that number: men, women, and children who had never faced such overwhelming odds. As the news of the approaching army spread, fear gripped the hearts of Medina's people. The threat wasn't just military, it was psychological, a tidal wave of dread that threatened to break their spirit before a single arrow was fired. But as the storm gathered, the people of Medina had no idea that their greatest stand, their most unexpected hope, was about to arrive. As the dust clouds of the approaching coalition darkened the horizon, Medina found itself trapped in a nightmare. The city's leaders gathered in urgent council, their faces etched with worry. The enemy was not just a single tribe or a familiar foe, this was a united front, a tidal wave of hostility that threatened to crush everything in its path. The Muslims of Medina were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded by enemies on all sides. Panic began to ripple through the community. Some whispered about fleeing, others about surrender, but most simply stared at the city's fragile walls, knowing they would never withstand a direct assault from such a massive force. In this moment of crisis, the Prophet Muhammad called his closest companions together. The question on everyone's mind was simple but terrifying. How could they possibly defend themselves against an army 10 times their size? Traditional tactics offered no hope. Open battle would be suicide, and the city's defenses were laughably inadequate for a siege of this scale. The tension in the room was suffocating, each suggestion more desperate than the last, till a voice from the back offered an idea so radical, it stunned everyone into silence. Salman the Persian, a companion who had seen the brutal sieges of his homeland, spoke up. In Persia, he explained, they would dig deep trenches around their cities to keep invaders at bay. It was a strategy unknown in Arabia, but it offered a glimmer of hope. The Prophet immediately recognized the genius of the plan. With no time to lose, he ordered the community to begin digging a massive trench along the most vulnerable side of Medina. It was a race against time, with every man, woman, and child pressed into service. The city's fate now hung on their ability to finish the trench before the enemy arrived. Desperate gamble that would test their unity, their faith, and their will to survive. But as the first shovels hit the earth, no one could predict just how close they would come to the breaking point. The race to dig the trench was nothing short of a battle against time itself. With the enemy's arrival looming, every able-bodied person, in Medina, young and old, Rich and poor grabbed whatever tools they could find and rushed to the city's edge. The work was grueling. The ground was hard, the days were long, and the nights were bitterly cold. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, and exhaustion threatened to break their spirits. Yet, in the face of overwhelming odds, the people of Medina pressed on, driven by a single hope, that this trench might be the barrier that saved them from destruction. What set this effort apart was the unity and determination that pulsed through the ranks. The Prophet Muhammad himself worked alongside his followers, shoveling dirt, carrying rocks, and sharing in every hardship. His presence inspired the weary diggers, turning moments of despair into bursts of energy. To keep spirits high, companions would recite poetry, sing verses, and remind each other of the greater purpose behind their struggle. But the challenges were relentless. At times, they struck solid rock, and their tools seemed useless. Hunger became so severe that some tied stones to their stomachs just to dull the pain. Yet, in the midst of this hardship, stories of the extraordinary began to emerge. When food was scarce, a small meal would somehow feed hundreds. When a massive boulder blocked their progress, the Prophet himself struck it, and it shattered, sending sparks that some companions later described as visions of future victories. These moments became lifelines, reminders that even in the darkest hours, hope could be found. The trench slowly took shape, 5 kilometers long, deep and wide enough to halt even the fastest horses. Every meter dug was a testament to their resilience. But as the final shovelfuls of earth were thrown aside, the real test was only just beginning. The enemy was almost at their gates, and the fate of Medina hung by a thread. The moment the enemy coalition reached the outskirts of Medina, the entire city seemed to hold its breath. 10,000 warriors, their banners fluttering in the desert wind, expected an easy victory. But as they approached, they were met with a sight that left them stunned. A deep, wide trench stretching across the city's most vulnerable side. This was something Arabia had never seen before. The invaders, confident in their numbers and strength, suddenly found themselves halted by a simple but ingenious barrier. Their horses reared back, unable to leap across, and their commanders scrambled to find a weakness. Days turned into nights as the coalition circled the trench, searching for any spot narrow enough to cross. But the Muslims had planned every detail. Archers lined the defenses, ready to rain arrows on anyone who dared approach. Frustration quickly set in among the enemy ranks. Skirmishes broke out along the trench's edge, with arrows and stones flying back and forth. The Muslims, though vastly outnumbered, held their ground with unwavering resolve. Every attempt to breach the trench was met with fierce resistance. The coalition's leaders, desperate to break the stalemate, tried to rally their men for a direct assault, but the trench proved too formidable. The psychological toll began to mount. The invaders had expected a swift conquest, but now they were bogged down in a siege with no end in sight. Then came a moment that would become legendary. A group of enemy champions, led by the fearsome Amr ibn Abdawat, managed to find a narrow point and leaped their horses across. The challenge was clear: a duel to the death. Ali ibn Abi Talib, young but fearless, stepped forward to face Amr. The clash was intense, echoing across the battlefield. In a stunning display of courage, Ali emerged victorious, sending shockwaves through the enemy camp. The coalition's morale wavered, and whispers of doubt began to spread. But the siege was far from over. As the days dragged on, hunger, fear, and uncertainty gnawed at both sides. Yet, for the people of Medina, the trench had become more than just a ditch. It was a symbol of hope, a line they refused to let the enemy cross. And as the standoff continued, new threats began to emerge from within the city itself. Just as the defenders of Medina braced themselves against the enemy outside, a new and even more dangerous threat began to fester within their own walls. The coalition's failure to breach the trench had frustrated their leaders, but they weren't ready to give up. Instead, they turned to a different kind of warfare, one that relied on betrayal and secret deals. The Banu Qurayza, a Jewish tribe living on the southern edge of Medina, had long maintained a pact of peace with the Muslims. But as the siege dragged on and the pressure mounted, whispers of doubt and temptation began to circulate among their leaders. The coalition's envoys, led by the cunning Hayy ibn Akhtab, visited the Banu Qurayza in secret, urging them to break their agreement and join the attack from within. At first, the Banu Qurayza's chief, Ka'b ibn Asad, hesitated. He knew the risks of betraying the Prophet and his people, but the promise of victory, the fear of being left alone if the coalition triumphed, and the relentless persuasion of Hayy finally wore him down. Quietly, the Banu Qurayza began to prepare for war, ready to strike at the heart of Medina when the moment was right. When news of this betrayal reached the Prophet, it sent shockwaves through the already anxious city. Now, the Muslims faced the terrifying prospect of a two-front war: enemy armies outside and traitors inside. The situation grew even more desperate. Women and children were moved to fortified buildings, and a small group of defenders was assigned to guard the city's interior. Even in these tense moments, stories of unexpected courage emerged. When a spy from the Banu Qurayza tried to scout the Muslim defenses, it was Safiya, the Prophet's aunt, who took matters into her own hands. Armed with nothing but determination and a wooden staff, she confronted and eliminated the threat herself, sending a clear message that the people of Medina would not go down without a fight. But the sense of danger was everywhere. Supplies ran low, and the fear of a sudden attack from within kept everyone on edge. The coalition, emboldened by the Banu Qurayza's betrayal, renewed their efforts, hoping to break the city's spirit once and for all. Yet, even as the walls seemed to close in, the defenders refused to surrender. The siege had become a test, not just of strength, but of loyalty, resilience, and the will to survive. And as the pressure mounted, the true breaking point was still to come. As the siege dragged on, the people of Medina found themselves pushed to the very edge of endurance. Hunger gnawed at their insides, the cold bit through their clothes, and the constant threat of attack kept everyone awake at night. The trench had held back the enemy, but it couldn't shield the city from the slow, grinding pressure of fear and uncertainty. Inside the city, whispers of doubt began to spread. Some people, known as the munafiqun, or hypocrites, started to question whether the struggle was even worth it. They complained about broken promises and impossible odds, urging others to abandon their posts and return to their homes. Their words stung like poison, sowing seeds of despair among the already weary defenders. The Prophet and his closest companions felt the weight of these challenges more than anyone. Not only did they have to guard against the enemy outside and the traitors within, but they also had to keep hope alive in the hearts of their people. The pressure was relentless. At times, even the most steadfast believers wondered if they would survive another day. The Quran itself describes this moment as one of the greatest tests of faith, when hearts rose to throats and eyes glazed over with fear. Yet, in the midst of this darkness, the Prophet made a bold move that would change everything. Realizing that brute force alone would not break the siege, the Prophet turned to strategy. He secretly reached out to some of the coalition's leaders, offering them a share of Medina's harvest in exchange for withdrawing their support. The plan was clever, but before it could be finalized, the city's defenders, led by the fiercely loyal Ansar, insisted they would rather fight than give up what little they had left. It was a moment of unity that reignited the city's spirit. But the real turning point came from an unexpected source. Nuaym ibn Mas'ud, a respected leader from the enemy camp, quietly approached the Prophet and revealed that he had secretly embraced Islam with the Prophet's blessing. Nuaym set out to sow discord among the coalition, spreading rumors and mistrust that quickly took root. Suddenly, the once united enemy alliance began to fracture from within. Suspicion and fear spread through their ranks, weakening their resolve. Just as the defenders of Medina found new strength, the city had reached its breaking point. But instead of collapsing, it was about to witness a miracle that would turn the tide of history. As the siege stretched into its final, agonizing days, the atmosphere around Medina grew heavier with every passing hour. The coalition's camp, once filled with the confident shouts of warriors, now echoed with frustration and suspicion. The seeds of doubt sown by Nuaym ibn Mas'ud had taken root, turning allies into rivals and making every decision a source of argument. Yet, even as the enemy alliance began to unravel, the Muslims inside Medina were still trapped, hungry, exhausted, and uncertain if they could hold out much longer. The city's fate seemed to hang by a thread, with hope flickering like a candle in the wind. Then, on a night colder and darker than any before, something extraordinary happened. Without warning, a violent windstorm swept across the desert, howling through the enemy camp with a fury no one could have predicted. Tents were ripped from the ground, fires were snuffed out, and supplies were sent tumbling into the darkness. Horses and camels panicked, breaking their tethers and scattering into the night. The coalition's warriors, already on edge, now found themselves battling the elements as well as their own fears. Some reports even speak of a supernatural terror gripping the camp, as if an unseen force had joined the fight on Medina's side. In the chaos, the Prophet sent his trusted companion, Hudayfa ibn al to gather intelligence from the enemy lines. Slipping through the shadows, Hudayfa witnessed the confusion firsthand. Leaders arguing, soldiers packing up, and the once mighty coalition preparing to flee. By dawn, the desert was eerily silent. The enemy had vanished, leaving behind only scattered belongings and the memory of a siege that had failed in the most dramatic way possible. For the people of Medina, the storm was nothing short of a miracle. Against all odds, they had survived. The trench had held, their unity had endured, and now, the threat that had once seemed unstoppable had simply blown away. The city's defenders emerged from their shelters, blinking in the morning light, hardly able to believe that the nightmare was finally over. But as they surveyed the empty battlefield, one thing was clear: Medina and the course of history would never be the same again. The morning after the storm, Medina stood in stunned silence. The city that had braced itself for destruction now found only peace and the scattered remnants of a defeated enemy. For weeks, the people had lived on the edge, surrounded by threats, betrayal, and the constant fear that every day might be their last. Yet, when the dust finally settled, it was not the largest army Arabia had ever seen that claimed victory, but a small, determined community that refused to break. The Battle of the Trench was more than just a military standoff. It was a turning point that exposed the limits of brute force and the power of unity, faith, and strategy. The coalition's defeat sent shockwaves across the Arabian Peninsula. The myth of Muslim vulnerability was shattered. No longer could the Quraysh or their allies claim that Medina was weak or isolated. Instead, the city emerged stronger, its people more united than ever. The alliances that had once threatened to crush the Muslims now began to crumble, as tribe after tribe realized that the old order was changing. The Prophet's bold leadership, the community's resilience, and the unexpected miracles that unfolded during the siege became legendary, inspiring generations to come. But perhaps the most lasting impact of the Battle of the Trench was the lesson it left behind. It showed that even in the darkest moments, when hope seems lost and enemies close in from every side, a single idea trench, a new strategy, a spark of faith can change everything. The people of Medina had faced betrayal from within, overwhelming odds from without, and the gnawing doubts of their own hearts. Yet, they held on, and in the end, it was their perseverance that turned the tide, that as the city rebuilt and life slowly returned to normal, one truth became clear: the siege had not just saved Medina, it had transformed it. From that day forward, the Muslims would no longer wait for their enemies to come to them. The balance of power had shifted, and the world would soon witness the rise of a new force in Arabia. The Battle of the Trench remains a testament to the power of courage, unity, and the belief that even the smallest community can stand tall against the greatest storm. And as history marched on, the echoes of that victory would continue to inspire those who dare to face the impossible.